Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Center Stage at the Phocuswright Conference. I'm especially glad to welcome our friends from Europe, Asia, and Latin America who've made the trip here. The borders opening means that we'll get to hear from a few of them over the next 2 days, right here on Center Stage. Now, isn't it great to actually be back in person at an event? And especially this event, seeing old friends, meeting new people, doing simple things like chatting over a cup of coffee, or conducting a meeting sitting across from someone at a table, or as happens to me at every single conference I ever go to, I hear a speaker say something and go, why didn't I think of that? I'm sure we're all going to have many such moments over the next 2 days. It's been a long 20 months. The impact of the pandemic closures has been devastating for the industry. In 2020, global travel bookings plummeted 60% to just $556 billion. Online bookings fared a little bit better. They fell by 57% to just $288 billion. The WTTC estimated that the travel sector's contribution to global GDP fell by a staggering 49%. Nearly 1 in 5 travel and tourism jobs were lost. That's 62 million in total. Airlines lost $200 billion during the course of the pandemic. Hotels in most parts of the world had to shut their doors. Car rental companies, they had to sell their fleets just to survive. Social distancing and Zoom became part of our everyday lexicon, as did lockdowns and variants and quarantine. But as we get to the end of this year, there is a lot of optimism and hope. The virus might be here to stay, but the travel tide is definitely turning. So hooray for vaccines and for science. But even as we celebrate, there is a lot of work to do. Just as the Renaissance era in history was a harbinger of progress and growth, so we see this period that we are in now as an opportunity for the travel industry to bring about a renaissance of its own. A time for us to build back in a way that's smarter, bolder, and better. And that means taking stock of the past, acknowledging missteps, learning from them, being open to new ideas, and exploring new ways of doing things. Having the courage to do the right thing for your companies, for the travel industry, and for the world. Now, last year, the fight for equity and inclusivity reverberated across the globe, and it continues. For a few years now, we at Phocuswright have been surveying the global travel industry on attitudes and perceptions around diversity and gender equity. Nearly a quarter of respondents in our last survey, and this was just a couple of months ago, they said their companies have no initiatives in place to increase diversity. So there is a lot of work that we have to do. Gender equality is another area where the industry needs to make progress. Women constituted more than half of the workforce in the travel industry right before the pandemic. Only a quarter of women rate the industry as good or excellent for career progression or for management opportunities. Creating a better industry is a subject that was very important to Phocuswright's founder, Philip Wolff, who we tragically lost earlier this year. Now, some of you knew Philip, some of you know of him. He was a mentor and a friend to many in the industry, and he is sorely missed. Philip, I think, would agree with Hans Christian Andersen's words, to travel is to live. And consumers agree wholeheartedly. Even in the very depths of the pandemic, they told us that travel is and will remain integral to their lives. we saw how true that is. Despite the restrictions and lockdowns, whenever there was an opportunity to travel, people took it. And if we need any further proof, from Singapore to Greece to the UK and the US, call it what you will, pent-up demand, revenge travel, or just the need for a plain old human connection. Consumers remain eager to take to the roads and skies. When flying wasn't a viable option, travelers took to the roads. When indoor spaces felt unsafe, off to the great big outdoors they went. Hotels shut down? Airbnb, Vacasa, Sonder, Home2Go, Vrbo, here they come. Now, there are a few segments that did pretty well. RVs, camping companies, even car rentals. But if there was one winner that we had to pick, it would be short-term rentals. A big IPO, I'm sure you all heard of that. A completed SPAC merger, another one that's pending. Who would have imagined that last summer? Of course, hotels are making a comeback. So what's next? Phocuswright's research shows that consumers have fairly strong opinions about the core strengths of hotels and rentals. So don't miss our research presentation tomorrow to learn more about that. The question, though, is, will these lodging players evolve to fit the needs of the post-pandemic travelers, to fit their expectations? Or are we going to see them move further apart and focus on what each one does best? We are going to ask our panel to chime in on that. Going back to that consumer behavior, though, one thing that did change. Even those who were most reluctant to take the plunge and book online, they were forced to do so. So in 2020, we saw global online penetration move past the 50% mark. It climbed 5 percentage points in a single year. Despite that, travelers also tell us that they want the comfort of talking to someone in person, especially as they navigate this ever-changing rules of COVID-era travel. In the US and in Europe, older travelers are leading the shift to online. More than half of US travelers who are aged 55 and above booked their trips exclusively online last year. That's an increase of 14 points in a year. And that shift is going to persist. Of course, the industry has taken note. Digitization now permeates all areas of travel. Many of us used biometrics to breeze through airport security, to board a flight, and it's taken us a while to get here. But it is gaining traction. So we'll be talking about the digitization of identity and biometrics later today with the CEO of Clear. While on the topic of identity, if you haven't heard the term self-sovereign identity, keep in mind you heard it here first. Today, when questions about privacy and about permissions and ownership of data permeate nearly every sphere of life, self-sovereign identity puts trust at the center, and it puts individuals, you and me, in control. More on that tomorrow when we talk about the applications of decentralized identity. For many of us here at the conference, this is our first business trip in the last 20 months. And by all accounts, including Phocuswright's own projections, business travel is going to be slower to recover than leisure travel. But the investor community is showing a lot of confidence in that battered sector. Big funding rounds for trip actions, tens of millions invested in Spot Nana. Interestingly, though, it's looking back at Phocuswright's startup database, which goes back more than a decade. The number of funded travel startups that have been founded has been steadily declining each year. So we had 400 startups in 2016, down to 177 in 2019, and just 12 in the first half of this year. Total funding, though, is going up. It reached $8 billion in 2019. In just the first 6 months of this year, investors put in as much money into travel startups as they did in all of last year. And by the third quarter, that was up to $5 billion. So yeah, travel is looking very, very attractive to investors these days. Activities and experiences got its share of the spotlight and the dollars too. And we have a great slate of speakers here to talk about that sector. Another company that grabbed the headlines recently is Hopper. Nearly 15 years after it was founded, it continues its journey with a pivot to fintech. Their founder and CEO will tell us why he thinks this is the next big thing, even as they retain their core OTA business. Now, any talk of OTAs inevitably leads us to Expedia, which began its transformation right before the pandemic and has been refocusing its sights ever since on what's important. More on that when Expedia's CEO makes his in-person debut on Center Stage. Now, transformation brings to mind the critical need for the travel industry to be at the forefront of sustainability efforts. That doesn't just include environmental goals. It also includes the need for social and economic developments of communities that we travel to. We'll be discussing how travel companies can work with all levels of government to bring back tourism in a way that benefits local communities. And coming as this conference does, right on the heels of COP26, is the travel industry finally ready to do its part to tackle climate change in a serious manner? And how do we do it? Well, we at Phocuswright certainly intend to do our part. And this conference will be 100% carbon neutral. We're going to offset the event's emissions through 2 projects, a tropical forest conservation project in Brazil and a nitrous oxide abatement project right here in Florida. From saving the planet to charting the industry's recovery. And, of course, revealing travel's next big things. It may seem as if we have set a high bar for the next couple of days. It's true. Why not? We are making up for lost time, after all. And we are absolutely delighted to be back live and in person. We're even more thrilled that you've all joined us. It's going to be a packed program full of fresh perspectives, challenging debate, and maybe a few surprises here and there. So, let the show begin.
Our new EV rental fleet is the absolute GOAT.
Nice. Speaking of goats, is that Tom Brady?
Yeah, he comes in to recharge, get software updates, you know.
Same time next week?
You got it.
Cool. Let's go.